What is capital? This video briefly goes over different examples of capital, different definitions of capital, and the context in which this kind of concept comes up. Looking at different examples of capital, it'll become clear why our definition of capital in general is something so vague. Let's think of capital as resources that are either actually used or are usable to produce either goods or services. Here are some different examples that all count as resources that are either used or can be used in order to produce something, like a good, a product that you can buy and sell, or a service, something that you can offer or go and receive. Intellectual property or somebody's idea or a patent counts as capital. Cash, which is liquid funds, counts as capital. And it's capital whether you're planning on using that today or 3 years from now. A company car, for example, is something that you're going to use to produce some good or some service. So that's also capital. Equipment, machinery, software, hardware, bonds. And so some of these are different kinds of capital, but they're all capital. Let's look at some of the kinds of capital that you have. Intellectual property, for example, can be intangible capital. Somebody having an idea, somebody knowing how to do something. This could also be linked with labor. Labor is something that you need in order to get a good produced. But then there's always cars. Cars are tangible capital. You might be using it literally to distribute something that you are selling. But then there's machinery, the equipment that you're using that's going to be fixed. You might not even use that machinery every single day. There's bonds that can be called debt capital. A loan can be called debt capital. These are not the only kinds of capital, and these are not the only examples of capital. And that's why our definition of capital is really hard to pin down. It can also mean different things in different contexts. For example, capital in economy versus capital in philosophy versus capital in tax law or law in general, capital in business. Capital can also mean something else in the terms of venture capital industry. For example, there's the investor who wants to provide cash or a building or land or equipment, and they want to have high returns on their investment. So they'll look for someone who wants to start a business or grow a business, and then they'll provide some capital by way of different examples of capital, and they become a shareholder, someone who's going to get a return on their investment if that resource is used to produce a surplus of value called profit. The goal of producing a surplus of value, in other words, a profit. The United States is a capitalistic society, and so a lot of what we do in our economy and in our politics is try to create value from a smaller amount of value, to start with something and to create more value than we started with. Today, our legal system has a way to tax capital. There's corporate taxes that people have to pay. There's a capital tax. There's capital gain tax. There's all sorts of ways that the government will take a small cut of the income that's produced, of the value produced, of the resources used from that capital. And that's a very complicated flow from the initial investment of somebody's idea, somebody's time, somebody's labor, equipment, machinery, materials that will lead into some good that's bought or a service that's provided. In business ethics, we might ask what the proper way, in order to do it ethically, we should be taxing capital. But think about philosophy more broadly. We can ask the question whether it's even ethical to have capital in the first place. And so recall those examples of capital. What does it mean to say that you have rightfully became the owner of a car or of machinery or of land? Who can own land? And who can come in and tax the landowner, and in what way? What does it even mean to own a building or to own land? What does it even mean? But also, should we be talking in these terms, which we most definitely are, in the framework of business ethics? Very few people ask the questions about what it means to own capital or whether we should own capital. It's also seldom discussed how we should tax capital because there's so much precedent for this kind of behavior in our capitalistic society. To hear a critique of this idea of owning land or different kinds of capital, of owning wealth, of trying to do whatever it takes to produce more value than you started with, read Karl Marx, who talks against capital and capitalization and capital societies.